I want to start with a story. Not one person's story exactly, a composite drawn from half a dozen accounts I've read, followed, and in some cases corresponded with over the past several years. I'm calling him David. The details are real. They come from real people who wrote publicly about what happened to them. I've compressed them into one narrative because the pattern repeats so consistently that the compression feels more honest than picking one example and pretending it's unique. David retired at 38 with $1.4 million invested. He had spent 11 years optimizing everything: cooking at home, driving a used car until it became unreasonable not to replace it, and then replacing it with another used car. Taking his lunch to work in a bag his daughter had decorated with marker when she was 4 years old, and keeping that bag long after the drawing had faded because it still worked. And because he had stopped needing things to be new. He and his wife had saved between 50 and 70% of their income for most of a decade. They had done the math so many times the numbers had stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like geography, a landscape they knew by heart. A destination with a fixed location and a known distance. The morning after his last day of work, he woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit. He made coffee. He sat at the table where he had spent 11 years staring at spreadsheets, and he had no idea what to do next. What followed was not what he had planned. The structure of his days dissolved. The professional identity he had not realized he was carrying, the specific way he stood slightly differently at parties when someone asked what he did, turned out to have been holding up more than he knew. He found himself, 6 months in, with money he didn't need to worry about and time he didn't know how to fill. And a persistent low-grade feeling that something had gone wrong, even though nothing, by any external measure, had gone wrong. He started having trouble sleeping. He described it as a particular kind of 3 a.m. dread that he recognized from stressful periods at work, but couldn't explain now when the source of the stress was supposedly gone. People in this situation write about it, repeatedly, in forums and comment sections and personal blogs that get passed around the community quietly. The way things get passed around when they're true but inconvenient. This video is about the thing those posts are about. It's about financial independence and early retirement, the math, the mechanics, the tools, the sequence. All of that is in here, and we're going to go through it in detail. But it's also about the parts that don't show up in the savings rate calculators, the parts that catch people who did everything right. I've been staring at a spreadsheet at 11 p.m. with cold pasta going stiff on my desk. I know what that version of this looks like. I'm not here to talk you out of pursuing financial independence. I'm here to give you the version of this conversation that I wish I had found earlier. The honest version. Let's start at the beginning. The FIRE movement, Financial Independence, Retire Early, did not begin with a book or a conference or a financial product. It began, more or less, with a blog. Mr. Money Mustache, the pen name of a Canadian software engineer named Pete Adeni, started writing in 2011 about how he and his wife had retired in their early 30s on ordinary software engineer salaries. By doing something that sounds simple and turns out to be genuinely difficult, spending dramatically less than they earned for long enough that their investments could cover their expenses indefinitely. The posts spread. They spread because they were funny and specific, and because Pete had a gift for making the math feel like liberation rather than deprivation. The central insight that the gap between your income and your spending is the only variable that actually matters, and that most people have far more control over that variable than they exercise. Landed for a specific kind of person with a specific kind of mind: engineers, analysts, people who like the feeling of a system clicking into place. But the intellectual foundations go back further. Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez published Your Money or Your Life in 1992. The book introduced a concept that sounds obvious in retrospect and restructures everything once you actually absorb it. Money is not an abstract number. It is a representation of the hours of your life you exchange to get it. Every purchase is not a transaction between your wallet and a cash register. It is a transaction between your finite life energy and the thing you're buying. Once you see it that way, it's difficult to unsee. The question stops being, can I afford this, and starts being, is this worth this many hours of my life? That reframing, mundane sounding, genuinely radical in practice, is the philosophical engine underneath all of the index fund mechanics. The spreadsheets are downstream of the idea. The formal research caught up later. William Benjamin's 1994 paper on safe withdrawal rates, the research that eventually produced the 4% rule, gave the movement its mathematical anchor. Trinity Study research in 1998 reinforced it. The academic literature on long-term portfolio survival rates became, for a community of spreadsheet-minded early retirees, something close to scripture. What followed over the next 2 decades was a community, forums and blogs and podcasts, and eventually a significant media presence. The term FIRE entered mainstream financial journalism. Books were written. The community grew beyond its original demographics in some ways while retaining its original shape in others, something we'll return to. Here's what the movement, at its best, actually is. It is a set of tools for reclaiming agency over the relationship between your time and your money. It is a framework for asking what your life is actually for and then organizing your financial decisions around the answer. It is not, at its core, about retiring at 35 and playing golf. That is the caricature. The substance is something quieter and more durable. Financial independence means having enough invested that your portfolio can cover your living expenses indefinitely, or close enough to indefinitely that the distinction stops mattering for practical purposes. What you do once you have that is your business. Some people retire completely. Some people keep working at things they love because the work itself is worth doing, and the paycheck has become beside the point. Some people use the runway to take risks they couldn't take when missing a paycheck meant genuine hardship. The retire early part is optional. The financial independence part changes your life regardless of what you do with it. That distinction matters, and we'll come back to it. But first, the math. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other.